Another thing that you talk about in the book are treadmill verbs.
Yes.
And after I read that part of the book, I could see them everywhere. I could see myself using them. I couldn't believe it. It was driving me crazy. What are treadmill verbs, and why should we encourage our clients to avoid them and replace them with destination verbs instead?
Yes. Again, there's a perfect example, because people don't notice that treadmill verbs are a problem today, and we use them all the time. So what is a treadmill verb? This is another term I coined to refer to verbs like review, report, share, update, communicate, the kinds of words that are on our agendas and that fill our conversations. And the reason they're treadmill verbs is because they're like being on a treadmill. You never arrive. There's no way to know when you're done. You can report forever. You can review forever. There's no way to know. There's no clear outcome that you're moving toward. So if you ask someone to report or review, you are issuing an open invitation to just talk without purpose. So we shouldn't use these verbs because they don't get you anywhere. They're just a way of letting people talk. And people will talk, I guarantee it. So in place of those, we need to use destination verbs. Verbs like decide. And decide, first of all, you need to know that, decision making is like the most common and most important activity we engage in our lives, in our businesses, in everything we do. But when you make a decision, you know when you're done because you have a decision, and a decision unleashes next steps. It unleashes true progress. So another one is to plan. When you create a plan, you're done. You know it. It's obvious. You're ready to move on. It unleashes progress. Planning, there's a caveat there, because some people can plan forever and turn it into a treadmill verb. But it's if you're careful about what you're doing, plan, it should be a destination. The third one is resolve. If you resolve a problem, if you look into a problem, figure out what went wrong, figure out what you're going to do about it. When you come up with a resolution, you're done. You know you can move on. The fourth one is a list. Now, a list might sound funny, but the list needs to serve one of those other three. So for instance, in order to make a plan, you might need a list of resources, or a list of action items, or a list of expenses, or a list of risks. There's all kinds of lists that go into a plan. And there's lists that go into decisions, and there's lists that go into resolving problems. But if you think in terms of the list you need right now, you know when you're done, when you finish the list, you put everything on there you can think of, and you're done. So you can move on, and you've unleashed next steps. The last two are confirm and authorize. And those are much simpler. You're looking for a yes or a no. Authorize or approval, you're just looking for someone to say, yes, you can implement, you can move ahead, you have my permission. Confirm is a little different, because people typically will go into a meeting and say, so far I've done A, and now I'm thinking of doing B. Am I on the right track? And all they want is a yes or no. And unfortunately, we're not clear enough, and people just jump in and start laying advice on them, saying, oh, just wait till you get to, step 10. Of course, the reality is this person's on step 2, and they haven't given a thought to step 10, and they're not going to even listen, But if you're clear about, look, so far I've done A, now I'm going to do B. Do you think I'm on the right track? Just say yes, or say no and take it offline and help them. But it unleashes progress. You know when you're done because you got your yes or your no. So the cool thing is that there are dozens of treadmill verbs, but those 6 I just named are the only destination verbs that really matter. Those are the ones that will unlock progress in whatever you're trying to accomplish. So get rid of this treadmill verbs and use destination verbs instead.
One thing that these destination verbs all have in common is specificity.
Yes.
Specificity is the first essential condition for achieving clarity. And in the book, you call it the habit of a clear mind. And you share 4 questions to help someone get specific about their outcomes. What are those 4 questions, and why is it so important that we don't start any meeting or conversation without asking them?
Yeah, well, my favorite one is, what needs to be different when we're done. And you should never start a meeting without knowing what needs to be different when we're done. And what I'm looking for is, what are those tangible outcomes that will unleash progress? What decisions, what plans, what lists? And if you're clear about what those are, you will make real progress. If not, you will have another kitchen sink conversation. So those 4 questions are that one, first and foremost, what needs to be different when we're done? What exactly are we trying to accomplish? It really is asking the same thing. How will we measure success? And how will we know when we're done? So the favorite, though, is what needs to be different when we're done. And it boils down to, what's the concrete, tangible outcome that we need to walk away with that we don't have now?
You're very strict about this in the book. When talking about outcomes, you say, well, it's redundant to say top priorities, right? Because
Yes.
priority, it was never supposed to be a plural word. So let's talk about that. How many things can we realistically focus on at the same time? And how can we tackle a never-ending to-do list?
Right. Oh, those are such great questions. Priority comes from a Latin word that had no plural. There was no plural for priority. And sometime back in like the 1950s, someone made it plural. And we should curse that person because we've been overwhelmed by priorities ever since. And the problem is that once you have too many priorities, of course, you don't really have any priorities. And you can't do multiple things at the same time. You have only one brain. You can only do one thing really at once. I know people talk about being able to multitask, but every time you shift from one topic to the other, there's ramping out time and ramping back in time, and it's not very efficient. So the way I look at it, you can only have about 3 things on your to-do list at any given time if you hope to accomplish anything. And the only reason you want those other 2 is because sometimes you have to wait for something, you're working on your top priority and you have to wait for someone to get back to you. So you've got something else to work on, or something that you can squeeze into little snippets of time. But we can't have these giant to-do lists, but we do. And they come from any number of sources. Man, I could talk for a long time about this, but for instance, when you're in a meeting, one of the things people do is they know that a meeting is a waste of time a lot of times. So to try to save the meeting, they figure out what action items need to come out of that meeting, so it feels like they got something out of it. So at the end of the meeting, they stop and brainstorm, okay, what are our action items? And these action items might have absolutely nothing to do with the original point of the meeting. They also may have nothing to do with the main priorities of the organization or the group, and have no relationship to the strategic imperatives. So we get these wonderful sounding action items that come out of kitchen sink conversations, which spanned all kinds of topics. So all kinds of interesting things were said, and all kinds of interesting good ideas came up, and suddenly they turn into action items and they land on someone's to-do list. And it's like, how did that happen? And why did I say yes? And you flood your to-do list. Same with email. Email, it just comes piling in, and it is basically another to-do list. So there's really only 5, if you have too much to do, there's only 5 ways to deal with too much to do that are effective, and there's one way that is ineffective. Okay? And guess which one we always choose? The ineffective way. So the first one is, you need to find a faster method. And this doesn't mean just working harder and faster. It means you need a new method that actually gets things off your list faster. Second, you need to figure out which things you really just plain don't need to do. The third is outsource or delegate. Doesn't necessarily have to be done by you. Get it off your list. Get in someone who's more appropriate, especially outsource or delegate. And the fourth is find a shortcut. And shortcuts sound like a bad idea, but especially because a lot of us are perfectionists, it's like a lot of times you don't have to do everything perfectly. Some things can be done so, and that's good enough. The fifth one is postpone. You can't do it all today. You can't even do it all this week. So something needs to be postponed. So that's 5 completely legitimate ways to deal with too much to do. But instead, we choose number 6. which is choosing none of the first 5. And that's also called wishful thinking. So we don't make the tough decision, and we just sit there with this huge to-do list, and we spend more time moving things around on the to-do list, or rewriting the to-do list, or subdividing things on the to-do list so we can cross more things off. And the list is still just huge, because we need to decide, what can we throw out? What can we postpone? What can we delegate or outsource? Can we find a faster method? And can we actually accomplish some of these things and get them done? But you need to make the tough decisions. Otherwise, it's wishful thinking.